Hey everyone, welcome to this video about the names of the chords. In a previous video I covered the names of the intervals, and I'll be using those interval names in this one. So if you're a little rusty on the names of the intervals, go ahead and check that one out. This video is divided into three sections. The first section I'll talk about major chords and all their variations. The second section will cover the minor chords and all their variations. And then the third section will be about chord families. And in the description I'll have chapter markers so you can go directly to the section that you're interested in. So let's get started with the major chords. I'm going to be using the C major scale to demonstrate the major chords. That's here on the piano. So the C major scale uses all the white keys. The C itself is the first note that I played, and in a chord like that, that's a C major chord. The C is known as the root of the chord, and the intervals in the chord are given with respect to the root. So we have a third and we have a fifth, and it's a major third and a fifth. So those three notes make up the C major chord. And if you add additional notes, that's still a C major chord. And if you add one down here, still call that a C major chord. If you go to this one, that's a C major chord with an E in the bass, and that's known as a first inversion. Still a C major chord, but you're playing it in a slightly unusual way. The most usual way and the root position is with a C in the bass. And the first inversion has an E in the bass, and the second inversion has a G in the bass. But those are all the C chord. When you see a capital letter and you're talking about chords, that refers to the major chord. So A, for example, would be A major, and C would be C major. And if you want to add a variation to that, for example, you wanted to add a second, kind of a harsh chord, but that would be notated C2. Now, instead of just adding a second, it's very common to drop the third and then add the second. So when you do that, that's called a suspended chord. And this particular chord, where you add the second and skip the third, that's called a C suspended second. You'd write that C sus2, where the C is uppercase, the sus is lowercase, and then the 2. So C suspended second. This chord is C minor. And you'd write C minor with a capital C and a lowercase m. That's the C major again, which is just written C. And then this chord is a C suspended fourth. So these suspended chords are kind of interesting. They're pretty common on the guitar, and they have a little bit of activity to them. They want to resolve. You notice that there's a little bit of tension when you play it, but it naturally resolves to the major. Continuing on from the C suspended fourth, the next one is C5. And C5 is a bit of a quirk in the notation. You don't say suspended, even though you're no longer playing the third, you're just playing the C5. It's a special notation for the power chord where you're just playing the root and the fifth. Now this sounds a bit hollow to me. You can make it sound a little bit stronger by doubling the notes. That gives it a bit of a stronger sound. It also sounds pretty good on a guitar, particularly when you have the distortion turned up a little bit. I guess maybe that fills in some of the missing frequencies. The nice thing about the power chord is that you're not committed to either a major or minor sound. So on some other instrument or on a vocal, you could be playing either a minor third or a major third, and you wouldn't conflict with that. So it gives you some flexibility. After C5, there's C6. And now we go back to that pattern where C means those three notes, and then you add the sixth. That's C6. And then next is C7th. So now we see C7th is another rule breaker. We have C, plus we add the minor 7th. We don't add the major 7th. And in fact, if you wanted to play this note in the chord, that's called a C major 7th. You'd write that capital C, lowercase m-a-j, and 7. C major 7th, C 7th. So I don't know if I can give a convincing reason for that. That's just the convention. I think C7 is actually the more commonly played chord, and so that's why it got the name of the 7th. After C7th, C major 7th, then we go to the 8th. Like I said, that's just a C chord and doesn't have any particular name. So after the octave, you get to the 9th. And with the 9th, there's one final rule that I have to tell you about, one more special case. With all the odd numbers greater than 8, if you have a 9th or an 11th or a 13th, it also implies that you have the 7th in there. So the C9th chord, just written capital C9, is that chord with the minor 7th in there and the 9th. If you wanted to play a C9 where you just added the 9th and you didn't put the 7th in, what you write is you write C add 9. So that's C add 9, and this is C9. You can hear the difference there. And the same thing with the 11th. It implies that you have, here I'm running out of fingers here. It implies that you have all of those notes below it, the 11th, the 9th, the 7th. Oh, I missed the 5th. There, we got them all. And but by that time, you're starting to run out of strings on the piano. I think we used up 6. And if you get to the 13th, you're definitely out of strings. So you just start dropping them. So the general rule is you have the root, you have the 7th, and you have the 9th or the 11th or the 13th. Those have to be there, and the other notes are sort of optional. You can have the 5th in there and the 3rd as well if you can fit them in, but if you can't, it's okay. So those are the names of the chords, and that's all I wanted to cover on the major scale. Let's talk about the minor chords. I'm going to illustrate the minor chords using the A minor scale. So this is A minor. And the A minor scale here is the natural minor, and it uses all the white keys on the keyboard. So I chose A minor just for the same reason that I chose C to illustrate the C major chords, because you can tell that way when I've wandered outside the key. So A minor itself is written with a capital A and a lowercase m, and it means these 3 notes, the A, the root, the minor 3rd, and the 5th. And then if you want to add notes to that, as with the C major, you just add the name of the interval that you want to add to the chord. And you can also do suspended chords. So there's A suspended second, and they're the same as in the major case. So there's no difference between A suspended second and A minor suspended second. So we just call it A suspended second. Then A minor. And notice that the suspended chords, now here's an A suspended 4th, can also resolve to the A minor. They don't have to resolve to the major. So we have A minor rather, A suspended second, A minor, A suspended 4th, A5, again that's the power chord, and A minor 6th. So A minor 6 is a rule breaker. For some reason they didn't want it to be this chord. I guess maybe it's a little too harsh sounding. So this is the A minor 6th, and in the A minor 6 we're actually using the major 6th interval. So if you wanted to give it its full name, you might call it A minor with a major sixth. But if you just see capital A, lowercase m, and a 6, it really means this A minor 6. So the next one after that is A minor 7th. So we're back to a normal pattern. We're adding a minor 7th interval to the A minor. And then we have the 8th, which of course is just an A minor. And then we go to the 9th. And we have the same rule as in the major case. When you have a 9th, it also implies that you have the 7th. And if you want to have an A minor without the 7th, if you want to have an A minor 9th in it without the 7th, you call it A minor, add 9. And so on. After that, it's the same as with the major scale. Next, I wanted to talk about chord families. If we look at the C major scale, you can play 1, 3, 5 at the root position starting at C. You get the C major chord, but you can also go 1, 3, 5 starting at any other key in the scale. So starting at D, going 1, 3, 5, we get a D minor chord, and so on. You can walk up the scale one note at a time, and each time you get a chord. And these chords all belong to the same chord family. They're chords that are available in the C major scale. You can play these chords without going outside the scale. And they're all major or minor chords except for this one. You get to the very last note here, the B. That's a B diminished chord, and you can see it has kind of a harsher sound than some of the other chords we've played. But the rest of them are major and minor chords. We've got a C major, a D minor, an E minor, an F major, a G major, an A minor, the B diminished, and then we have the C major again. Those 7 chords make up the chord family of the C major scale. There's an alternate name for each of those chords. Rather than referring to them by their letter name, their name of their note, C, D minor, etc., you can refer to them by their position in the scale, which makes it convenient when you're changing scales. Like say you want to do the same chords but in a different scale. You want to play it in A major instead of C major. So if you have a numerical name based on its position in the scale, then that stays the same. So the C chord, being the first chord in the scale, is also known as the 1 chord, and that's written with a Roman numeral, so a capital I. The second chord is the D chord, the D minor chord. So that's also written with Roman numerals, but with lowercase Roman numerals to distinguish between major and minor. So that's written II. And so on. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, using up those Roman numerals. And if you've heard of a 5-4-1 chord progression, that's what it's referring to. The 5th note in the scale is the G. So the 5 chord is here, the G major. The 4 chord is F major. And the 1 chord is C major. And that's a 5-4-1. But you could play 5-4-1 in the A major scale as well, and it would sound the same, just shifted down a little bit. So it's convenient to use the numbers rather than always having to use the letter names of the chords. There are other names for these chords that are based on the relationships between them. So for example, if we take the 1 chord, which is a C, and we look at the 6th chord, which is the A minor, we see that they're actually pretty closely related. They have 2 notes in common. And we also know that A minor and C major use the same keys on the keyboard. Those scales use the same keys, the white keys of the keyboard. So we call A minor the relative minor to C major. And if we look at the other major chords in the chord family, for example, if we look at the G chord and we drop down 2 steps, we end up at E minor. and E minor is the relative minor to G. Once again, we see they have two notes that overlap. And also, if we were to play out the scales of the G major scale and the E minor scale, we would see that they use the same notes. And similarly, the F chord has a relative minor in D minor, just dropping down 2 steps. So that's the one set of relationships between the major chords and their relative minors. And the other relationship is between 1, 4, and 5, between the C major, the F major, and the G major. And these have names. The 5 chord is also known as the dominant chord. And I think it's called the dominant chord because it has a very strong tendency to want to resolve back to the C. And this tendency is enhanced when you add a 7th. The dominant 7th very much wants to go back to the 1 chord. And then if G is the dominant, F is called the subdominant. So just 1 below the dominant. F also has a tendency to want to resolve to C as well. So this 5-4-1 progression you may have heard of is G to F to C, or 5-4-1. If you have a melody that's written in the C major scale and you want to harmonize with it, which is to add some chords that fit with the melody, you can find chords that match up with any melody, with any note in the melody, using this C major chord family. So you have a choice, in fact, between different chords. So a note like G could be harmonized with the C chord, or with the G chord, or even with the E minor chord. So this choice gives you a lot of variety, and you can choose to mostly harmonize using major chords to give the song a certain feel, or you can harmonize using mostly minor chords to give it a different feel. But sometimes it's musically interesting to bring in a chord that's outside the family, and when you do that, you're often bringing in a chord from a neighboring chord family. So what is a neighboring chord family? Well, the two neighbors to C are actually F and G, the 4th and the 5th. And let's take G, for example. If you started at G and just played a scale, by that I mean a G major scale, you'll see that I used 1 sharp. So the key signature for G major has 1 sharp in it. But this means it's pretty close to the scale, the C major scale we started with. And something similar happens with F. If you start at F and just play the F major scale, you'll see it used 1 flat. So it's actually very similar to the C major scale, just 1 note that's different. If you look at the chord families that go with those different scales, let's take G, for example. The 1 chord is G, and the 4 chord is C, and then the 5 chord is D major. So we can see that G and the C overlap with the C chord family, and then the D major chord is a new one that's introduced, taking advantage of that extra key, that different key that the G scale has that's not in the C scale. And something similar happens with F. If we have if we look at the chords of the F major scale, we start with the F chord. If we go to the 4 chord is actually B flat major. So that's a new chord. And then the 5 is the C chord again. So what we've got here is the two neighboring families, one on either side. We've discovered a small portion of the circle of fifths, and if you're interested in this, you can go look up the circle of fifths in Wikipedia, and it'll have more more stuff about it than you can memorize. But it's for the purposes of songwriting, you mainly just stick within the local neighborhood like this. You can wander further afield every time you move forward another fifth, say from C to G. From C to G, we looked at the C family, we looked at the G family. You could go forward another fifth from G, and that would take you to the D scale, and there's a family of chords on the D scale, and you could maybe bring in some things from that, but it's a little further afield. So you can think of that as moving to the right on the circle of fifths, and then moving to the left is the same as going up a fourth. So we can go from C to F, and on the F major scale we've moved one notch to the left, and then from F, if we go up a fourth to B flat, we've moved another notch to the left. And this, whatever we end up with, I don't even know where we end up, but you'll be somewhere that has two flats in it. And D, for example, the D major scale will have two sharps in it because you've gone two steps to the right on the circle of fifths or two steps to the left. So the main point is that these notes are available for you to play around with if you're getting a little tired of just sticking to the chords in the chord family and the notes that go with them. Try pulling in some notes from a neighboring chord family and see what it does. I wanted to illustrate the idea of using chords from a neighboring chord family with an example from a real song. And the song I chose is from 1952. I chose an older song because I wanted to make the point that these ideas have been around for a while. This song is called Your Cheatin Heart, and it's by Hank Williams. And the chords that it uses, the 1, 4, and 5, I'm going to pretend like it was written in C because that'll make it easier. I think it was actually written in a different scale, but we'll ignore that for now. So the 1, 4, and 5 with the C scale are the C chord, the F chord, and the G chord. And what Hank does in this song, though, is rather than going directly from C to F, he does that sometimes, but sometimes he uses the trick of going from C to C7th and then to F. And you can see that gives a little more force to the transition because the C7 wants to resolve to F. And what's happening is that if you were to take the point of view of the F major scale, C7 is the dominant seventh that makes you want to go back to the one chord, which is the F major chord. So it's a nice way of transitioning you to another chord. And you can even use this to transition to a completely different scale. So you could, after going from C to C7 to F, you could just stay in the F major scale. For example, if you had a song where the verses were in one key and the chorus was in a different key, you could use that trick to transition from one key to the other. But in this case, it's just being used to move the transition along. It's giving a little extra force to the chord transitions. And so we're using the neighbor to the left, the F major scale, and we're borrowing one. You can think of it as we're just borrowing this one note, the B flat, or you could think of it as we're borrowing the C7 chord because that's a natural chord in the F major scale to get to the F. The same thing happens using the G major scale. So going to the right, sometimes Hank will transition from the C chord to the D major chord, and from C to D major, you've actually pulled in a key or a entire chord, as it were, from the G major scale, and then he goes from there to a G. So it's C, D, and G. And you see that the D helped set up that transition to the G because it made the G sound a little more satisfying. And again, he's not using that to change keys, although you could use it that way, but he's staying in the key of C and then just continuing from there, and he's just using it as a way to give more force to that transition and also to maybe add some interest to the melody line because he actually hangs on the D chord for a couple of bars. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about the names of the chords, chord families, and chord family neighbors. So hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you all next time. Bye now.